Oi pessoal, sou eu mais uma vez, Caetano Veloso, colunista da Mídia NINJA, e hoje vou entrevistar Roger Waters.
Perfect.
So, it's great that you are in Brazil. Yeah, because it's always great that you come. Because people love you. We all love you, you know, since the Pink Floyd days, it's a very important thing. Well, we have talked a little bit before today. I'm very pleased to meet you personally. I've seen you personally once, but you were on stage, I think, in Glastonbury many years ago. First Glastonbury Festival. I was living in London. I was exiled. But we exchanged letters when I went to Israel, because you have been working with this boycott movement in the world against Israel because of the oppression of the Palestinians by the presence of Israel in the region. And I went to Israel, and so I was not part of the boycott itself, but in fact I made contact with Breaking the Silence movement, and I didn't go back to Israel, but I went that time, and we had a letter conversation. But this time, we're talking about what is happening in Brazil. And you were here, I'll tell you, this time it's been a bit dramatic because of the political scene, moment that we're going through now in Brazil. And it is a little bit like what is happening all over the world in a way. Here and there, in many places, there are these authoritarian movements growing. And you have been an activist pro human rights against oppression. And we'd like to hear your voice now saying things about what you felt and saw in Brazil this time.
Well, all right, where to start? I start at the center of the thing was that I started reading about the presidential election that we had. You had the first bit of it, 10 days ago now? And you've got another part of the election with the two leading candidates coming up in another 10 days' time, is it?
A few days.
A few days. And on paper, you go, and then, well, obviously this guy stands no chance because whatever. But then you read, no, this guy stands every chance. He's extremely popular, apparently, all over the country. And Bolsonaro, obviously, I'm talking about. And you think, how could that possibly be when you read what he's said in the past and what kind of a guy he is? And so you're exactly right, though, that it's a global phenomenon brought down on all our heads by really, it seems to me anyway, by the kind of neoliberal economic policies that were developed in Chicago and then sold to the world via Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and others, saying, listen, all we have to do to solve all the kind of social problems around the world is to unfetter the corporations and the economic systems, deregulate everything, and just allow it to be a free-for-all, just a feast for the strongest, wildest dogs. And what they've discovered it, and they will become very wealthy, obviously, but it will all trickle down, and so that will be the end of social unrest and things, because that system will work. And it's clearly been a monumental failure. Nothing trickles down. Nothing, as you know. I mean, and funnily enough, we've just been for like 2 weeks staying in Sao Paulo, and hubbing out of Sao Paulo and doing different gigs. And being there is a big cultural shock if you're not used to high walls and razor wire and security and in one little enclave that has trees in it. And 100 yards down the road there are people living in burrows in an earthen bank, you know. So it's kind of shocking to see.
It is for us too.
But I believe you.
It is shocking. It's frightening indeed.
Yeah.
But I'll ask you, don't you think it says a lot that all these phenomenon that put together authoritarianism with the regulation of finance, that with the Chicago style of economics, politics, and now this is kind of being sketched in Brazil, which is the biggest country in Latin America.
Yeah, it's, you know, to anyone who has studied authoritarianism and neoliberal economics and history, anyone who's sort of ever read a book about any of this stuff, or anyone who is cognizant of what happened in the Weimar Republic in Germany in 1933, it's as plain as day that this is that to even toy with the idea of having somebody like Bolsonaro as the president of your country would be unthinkable if you had any social, political, or humanitarian feelings or education of any kind. Because just from what the guy said, he damns himself with his own words, with his talk of what we need is more guns and what we need is this and that, and we should go into the favelas and just go in and kill everybody and then everything will be fine. It's obviously nonsense. And it will only serve to set this great country, because Brazil is a great and wonderful country with extraordinary...
I agree.
Yeah, I know, but with an extremely kind of diverse cultural and manifestations. But it's because the people are in such desperate states, because of neoliberal economics, they, just as they have done north of the border in the United States of America, they are uncomfortable, unhappy, feel themselves to be in a desperate situation. And because they've been sold the false narratives that are sold to them by the mainstream media, this is what they need is access to whoever these nice young people are who are doing this, you know, who are this alternative media outlet. So the only way that you and I and anybody else who has any interest in the human race has to communicate with all our brothers and sisters at the grassroots level or at any level. And so this is why this is fundamentally important. It's not really, obviously it's not about Brazil. It's about whether or not, I've said this to every audience I've been in front of in Brazil, at least towards the end of the concert, I always bring up 1948 in Paris and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and say everyone in this room at some point has to ask themselves whether they are attached to the idea that such a thing exists, because this is a very new idea. It's only a couple of 100 years old. Yeah. The idea that individual human beings have rights is very, very new, but it's a new and bold and wonderful idea that if you can accept it in your heart, as you know, it liberates you to all kinds of possibilities of how we might reorganize the world away from Friedman Chicago economics into a model that shows that we care about the community and that we care about each other and that we care more for the weakest members of society than we do for the ones who are, like you and me, comfortable in material ways anyway. So it's exciting times because we have no other way of selling this idea, because when I say that to audiences, they all go, yeah, of course, that's a given, but it's not a given. It isn't a given because it's not the way we act as societies towards one another. There is a temptation to just keep grabbing whatever you can for yourself and screw the rest of society. And that is where the fundamental dissatisfaction in developed Western societies comes. Obviously, in underdeveloped countries and in the more of the southern hemisphere, that's even kind of further to the east, worse off than in South America, they are still in the grip of the old European colonial settler movements, which, as to some extent, so are you. And so is North America, obviously. And actually, so is most of Asia and most of Southeast Asia as well. So that the European push to Vasco da Gama has a lot to answer for, as does Francis Drake or any of the colonial settler movements that sprang eagerly from Western Europe in the 15th century and 16th century. Sort of did their level best to destroy the idea of human beings being equal and having rights under the law. That's the other thing, of course, is that some of the great powers, the United States being the foremost of those, do not accept the idea that universal law might be a good thing. They just go, nope, we're not doing that. We didn't sign the Treaty of Rome, and we absolutely will not be answerable to anybody. This tends to happen when you're the guy with the gun.
Yeah, but we do need some universal principles.
We do, yeah.
Otherwise, it's hard to live in a world in which individuals and groups intertwine and talk and exchange information. It's really needed. But I'd ask one very particular thing that concerns both of us, because we are about the same age, and we have been working with popular music since the 1960s. Mm-hmm. And in fact, you mostly, because as being part of the main scene of rock and roll, helped leading a mental movement, global mental movement, that led to for a deeper, more radical understanding of individual freedom, and even fed the left parties and groups with different agendas from what they had until then. When I was 20, a left-wing colleague at the university would have found kind of an alienation if somebody were interested in liberating women, in liberating gay people, and even talking too much about race, It was because they had the classical class way of reading society. And after the 60s, the mid-60s on, this scene changed worldwide. Don't you think that many things that are happening nowadays are kind of a response, a reaction, in the bad sense of the word, to that achievement?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm follow what you're saying. You know, how do I explain Donald Trump or Bolsonaro? Okay, I have to think very fast about that because I haven't actually tried to sort of explain it. I sit open-mouthed in horror and go, why would the people allow these assholes to destroy the planet in front of their eyes very, very systematically and obviously? I mean, where I live in the United States of America, you know, the administration, though I think Trump is really a symptom of what American society has become, where it has none of it has anything to do with individual human rights. It's only about commerce, and it's only about wealth and commerce and corporations and so on and so forth. That's what it's about. That's why the only responsibility that a corporation in America, in North America, has under the law is to maximize the bottom line on its account sheet for its investors. That's the only responsibility. They have no social responsibilities of any kind enshrined in any regulations or any kind of law. The belief is that if they just behave as selfishly as they possibly can, that's enough. And
it's the entire money land.
Yes, completely, yeah. So now with Trump dismantling the EPA, you know, environmental protection, and denying climate change, and so on and so forth, and spending $1 trillion a year on, you know, and blah, 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 and supporting Israel, $38 billion now promised over the next 10 years to this apartheid, racist, rampant state in the middle of the Middle East, and for everybody except for what? Why? What for? Commerce, oil. What will help us get as much as we can out of the rest of the world so that we can have 2 or 3 Gulf Streams instead of 1. I suppose, I mean, I'm not quite sure what the motivation really is for all of this, but it's twisted, it's very twisted. And it is destroying the planet. There will be no Earth. They will destroy it. And they declare, they don't pretend not to. They absolutely say, give me power and I will destroy everything. It's written down in everything that they believe, Bolsonaro and Trump and the others, you know, Orban in Hungary and blah, blah, blah. So you think to yourself, why do we, the people, not go, oh, that's not what we want. We don't want that. Because there are a lot more of us than there are of them. Unfortunately, they have an enormous amount of power because of the accumulation of all of that wealth into this one tiny And also, I've met some of these arseholes in social situations. I'm naming no names. They believe themselves to be valuable. They think that because they're making billions and billions of dollars, that makes them proud. They're proud of themselves. They're proud of it. They think it's a good thing. They've accepted the idea that this is the ultimate way to express something valuable and commendable in a human being, is that they can steal billions of dollars from other people and secrete it away. And they're like squirrels. You know, I'm super squirrel. I've got all these nuts in a tree. So I know I'm rambling, but that's why this is so important. What you're doing here tonight, and this is to get other ideas, to allow ourselves to share other ideas, other ways of organizing our society, other ways of doing things.
Yes, sometimes it seems tragic. Sometimes we are led to think or to wonder, is humanity necessarily destroy itself, destroy the planet?
Well, it's the fundamental question, isn't it, that faces us all for every
Is it
breath
our
we take.
destiny?
I don't believe so.
Neither do I, but
Okay.
but it's a question that must be put.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, when I listed the new agendas that came with our generation, because before what happened to rock and roll in the mid-60s, thanks to the British, in fact, because rock and roll was kind of cultural rubbish until the British came in. I remember very clearly. And when it gained intellectual respectability, it brought a lot of themes that were not put until then. And that was called counterculture. And rock and roll was kind of the head of the movement, you know. And when I was listing the agendas, I had forgotten exactly the environment agenda that you mentioned when you talked. And maybe it's the most important of them all, you know. I mentioned women, gays, and race, but I didn't mention the environment, ecological agenda, which is maybe the basic one, because this is this is the tragic point. Are we destined to destroy ourselves, you know, to destroy our environment and die with it? But my question now would be to you, you're talking to me like you are talking now. And are you aware that abroad, most people would kind of agree with you or be interested in what you're saying? But in Brazil, the press is kind of deaf to all the demands and questions that are asked, you know, about these issues. And of course, not the whole population of the country, but the majority of the voters seem to approve of Bolsonaro, you know, and the press is kind of, it's ironic because it has the habit of being mentally colonized, but in this case, they pretend they are totally national. They read The Economist, The New York Times, the Washington Post, whatever, and they say, these people are, they don't understand Brazil because they are not Brazilians, you know. Mm-hmm. The press in Brazil has been until now, with an exception of Folha de São Paulo a little bit this week, not at all critical of the danger that Bolsonaro means. The growth of his popularity means a threat that the Brazilian press refused to recognize, you know. They say, on one side you have a right-wing extremist, on the other side a left-wing extremist, as if they were the same, you know, which is not true.
Of course it's not true.
But, you know, in Brazil, you would be talking to maybe less than half the population, and or at least a lot less than the number of voters. And in fact, against the Brazilian press, you know, we now are working with an independent group of young guys who have these independent media thing that we can talk and say these things, but in the big Brazilian newspapers, things could not be said this way.
They can't anywhere in the mainstream media, anywhere in the world, because the mainstream
It's a
media...
malaise.
Well, it's bought and paid for. It's part of the way of controlling the narrative of the way we are all rushing headlong to hurl the human race over the edge of the cliff, you know, to death and destruction. But the fundamental question is, why? So I agree with you that it's very difficult for people who are concerned about these questions to voice them, because you're quite right, the press won't report it. They will not report it. And what's even more dangerous and difficult is the fact that Mark Zuckerberg and like-minded pricks like him are trying to destroy the other voice, the independent voice, that might turn out to be, no, not might, will turn out to be the voice of reason. It's always the wisest voices that are sidelined by society. And I think that's because guys who muscle their way to the front of society, pushing everybody else over the way. And unfortunately, democracy may be a jolly good idea. It's relatively new as well. It's only a few thousand years old. But tend to be pretty ordinary people by and large. They're not the great thinkers. People in politics, they're just not, because they have to spend their lives figuring out how to climb the next rung of the ladder and being nice to this person, rather than being like Chomsky or somebody and studying things and thinking about things and saying, might it not be? I saw the end of Noam Chomsky, a lecture in a university in America from like a few weeks ago, where he says there's a solution to all of this, like that. And he looks at all these students listening to him and he says, obey the law. And he points to the fact that the US government absolutely flouts the law and all its agencies on every possible occasion. The law is completely irrelevant to the running of the government and foreign policy and society and domestic policy. So Chomsky points that out, and it's so simple, and yet it's so self-evidently correct and right. But you know, he's a marginal voice. I adore the man, you know, and I hang on every word. But as far as society is concerned, he's a lunatic. He's just, you know, he's irrelevant. I'd rather listen to Donald Trump. So we're in a deep and difficult predicament. The whole, which is manifested, as you say, by the election that's going on here in Brazil right now. And you think, well, how does it work? And then when you look at the machinations of it and how it works, you come back to 2016 and that last presidential election in the United States, and you follow the money, and it comes back to Cambridge Analytica, and so it comes back to how can you control, and so suddenly you realize that, I mean, you talked about English rock and roll, and I often talk about the Beatles. When the Beatles made Sgt. Pepper, they started to write with a voice that felt true about their own experiences. So it kind of, before that, popular music was about men sitting at, you know, pianos writing songs and then giving them to cute girls to sing. And but then the Beatles suddenly went, no, you know, we can sing about loneliness or what our lives are like, Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields and mental health and anything, whatever. So they opened a fabulous box of dreams, really, for the rest of us, almost single-handedly. And that's the tradition the tradition I come from comes from that, married to Woody Guthrie or Hughie Ledbetter, or I protest songs from the days of slavery, or post that, and from the battles which were real up to a certain point between labour, organised labour, and management, rich people and organised workers. So everything that Marx wrote about and actually has happened all the way through my whole life, and they won. Organised labour has no power anymore in the United States, anyway. There is none. They pay people whatever they want. Nothing. People, the richest country in the world are living in the woods under tarpaulin. They can't afford healthcare. They can't afford anything. There is no life. No wonder they're pissed off. But the sad thing, obviously, is that they're not pissed off with the people who are doing it to them. They just elected one. Trump is the guy who fucked you. And so is Bolsonaro. I'm sorry to raise my voice, but it's...
Yes, it's good that you raise your voice, because we need to oppose strongly these things, because they, the rule of law is threatened by this reaction against any kind of dream of equality, because accumulation leads, accumulation of wealth.
That was the word I was searching for earlier. Accumulation.
That's what we were talking about.
Yeah.
That's the center of the thing. Yeah. But we do need voices like yours to shout and scream against it. Did you know that Bolsonaro here was invited by the Jewish Community Club, and he made this speech, which was the most racist that he did, and he was applauded by the Jewish audience in the club. But outside the building of the club, a group of people from the Brazilian Jewish community were protesting against the fact that Bolsonaro had been invited to talk there. So there was this tension, but I think it means a lot that Bolsonaro said racist words within a Jewish community club in Brazil. And it's also meaningful that lots of Jewish outside the building protested against it.
Yeah.
But inside Netanyahu supporters invited him and applauded him.
Well, of course, yeah. But which only goes to show us that we cannot judge a religion or a community as a general thing.
No.
There will be humane, kind, good people in any community.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what they are.
And of course
they
there are
and
in
there
Israel.
There will be the Bolsonaros and the Netanyahus and the Donald Trumps and the arseholes as
Yes.
well.
No doubt.
There's
in
the
Brazil,
settler mentality.
Lots of good people are voting for Bolsonaro because they are deluded by some crazy ideas, and
well, all I could say to those good people is they should remember 1933. I'm sure a lot of good people voted for Adolf as well. And it was a democratic election.
No doubt.
But then once he got into power,
yeah,
they had the Reichstag fire and this, and suddenly everything changed and there was no law anymore. It's just brown shirts and thuggery. It's a very, very slippery slope. So all those good people who are thinking about voting for Bolsonaro, wow, what a horrific mistake in anybody's personal life to just say, maybe he'll, I don't know what, reduce crime? Is that the idea? That's always the platform. I will bring stability to the state. The only debate I ever spoke in when I was at school, when I was a little kid, was I proposed the notion that this house believes in world government. So there's that kind of childish sort of teenage thing of, well, could we organise things like this so we can figure out how to look after all our brothers and sisters, because national borders and walls and tariffs and all of that stuff is counterproductive to the idea. It subverts us into the notion that there's an enemy, and that if we can defeat the enemy, we'll be fine. That's the solution to our problem. If we can stop the Muslims coming in, or not let the wetbacks through the Rio Grande, or whatever it might be, that somehow we will have achieved a victory that will lead us to a utopian future where everything's all right. No, all that's happening is that you are being diverted, if you believe that bullshit, from thinking, I kind of hate this. Why do I hate it? Because I'm sick and I can't afford to see the doctor, or because my kids they're not getting any education, and I don't, why, you know? Well, it's nothing to do with the Mexicans or the Chinese, it's to do with the accumulation of wealth, you know, which we know. So all of this war business is a diversionary tactic so that the very wealthy can go on accumulating all that wealth at the expense of everybody else. And what you were saying, which is so true about the mainstream media, is that they like to sell the narrative that war's actually a good thing, and you know, we need it because we've got to stop the Russians invading the rest of Europe. You know. Anyway, you know, we could sit and talk about this till the cows come home. I just hope the cows do come home one of these days. You know, that would be a good thing.
Let's hope for the best.
Hey.